Welcome to The Future of Fashion, the Exponential Academy podcast series. The objective of these podcasts are to get leadership thinking about the impact and the footprint of the fashion industry in the world today and what is technology's role in the future of fashion. I have a very interesting personality in the studio today. His name is Andrew Ramm. Andrew has been a startup executive where he has managed 100 million plus businesses and transformed them from a loss making entity to a profitable, thriving business. He's also worked with known organizations like Autodesk, where he was the global director for marketing, and his later role with Amazon as the president of the guided shopping arm of Amazon. We are happy to welcome Andrew Ramm in the studio. Good morning, Andrew, and welcome.
Shami, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get started into our discussions about fashion, I'd like you to share what are you busy these days, after your stint with Amazon? What's keeping you busy? What's keeping you inspired?
Well, I'm working with a few different startups, but spending a lot of my time with one particular startup that is trying to use AI to make cities more green, more accessible, less carbon intensive, to try and make it so, people can actually get downtown and shop and engage in this sort of vibrant downtown environment. And so we're trying to find ways to give cities better ways to plan using AI so that people aren't circling the block. So that's what I'm spending a lot of time on right now.
Thank you. Thanks for that. It's definitely a very, very exciting time that we are, living in today. And
For sure.
I can't imagine what the next 5, 10 years is going to do in how society and life will change. With respect to AI, with respect to emerging tech, and your experience with consumer behavior, what are you excited about? I mean, what are you excited about? Well, I don't know. But having spent a lot of time in the fashion industry, I would definitely be excited about a direction that this technology can potentially do, through the lens of responsible fashion. So let me rephrase that. Technology, behavior, responsibility. So where do you think, in your experience, where could this go?
What I'm actually really, really, really excited about is the idea of advances in 3D printing that can allow us to develop patterns and samples in almost real time, without having to get something from overseas or have a specialty pattern maker, and the ability to give designers almost real-time feedback about what it is they're trying to design and whether or not it's going to be ideal for the customer that they're trying to get, and make changes in real time and get those things right before they actually go to market. But it helps them get to market much faster. The other thing about 3D printing, and especially 3D printing at scale, you can think a lot more about nearshoring or onshoring, and the ability to produce textiles and produce garments locally, or at least very close to locally, so we're not burning a significant amount of fossil fuel, just simply transporting goods from one side of the world to the other. So I'm particularly, super fascinated by the potential for these things to come about. Obviously, I would add to that robotics. So if it's mechanized today, it will be robotic tomorrow. Any job that is either repetitive, tedious, dangerous, or inherently sort of stressful from the standpoint of physical labor will ultimately be robotic. And so I'm really most excited about the idea that garments can be produced at scale anywhere at reasonable cost, and we don't have to burn a lot of carbon-based fuels to get them from one place to another.
I have a tough time getting my head around, I think the world of fashion, it's always been the more there is, the more abundant it is, the better the dopamine, right? You worked in organizations that have changed the paradigm. Win-win. Win for the organization, win for the consumer and win for the planet we live in.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any thoughts on what could this shift in paradigm be in the world of fashion, with technology being a facilitator, where
I already,
the brands
yeah.
win, the customer wins, and we
Yeah,
all
well,
win.
I think I already referenced one, which is, how do we produce garments locally? But the thing that I think stands out to me that I think will make a huge difference going forward. See a lot of the emergence of biofabricated materials. This is very exciting. The idea that we don't actually have to grow cotton, we can make it in a lab, right? We know we will no longer have to harvest animals for leather. The double benefit of reducing animal cruelty, reducing factory farming, and reducing the carbon impact of of raising animals specifically, well, for food, but also for their hides. If we can reverse that trend and produce these things in a factory, in a lab, in a way that changes the game there, I think that's going to be massive. It'll be a huge paradigm shift, because then, what do we struggle the most with fast fashion? It's garment quality, right? I mean,
Mhm.
the impact to climate and an impact to the environment and the planet aside, garment quality has suffered. Why is it that we're buying garments that only last a year or 18 months and then we're throwing them away and they go into a landfill and we got to buy something else? If we can make these biofabricated materials at a fraction of the cost of, growing cotton or harvesting an animal, and can create premium quality materials at very little more than the cost of producing, cheap and non-durable things, I think that's going to have a massive impact. That for me is where I want to see the major brands invest their time and effort, because I think if we can get there, we can really make a huge shift in how garments are built and delivered and worn by consumers. We'll get just much more out of that with less impact to the environment.
And what about that balance, Andrew? Like when you talk about the guided shopping,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
that I mean, to an extent, that was more a behavior change, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a very big behavior change, because our fundamental concept was, how do we make the shopping experience adapt to the shopper and not the other way around? Amazon has done an extraordinary job of teaching its customers to use its search-based shopping paradigm. We had a point of view that said, no, the shopping experience should mold itself to the shopper's intent and the shopper's agenda and the shopper's use case, and guide them through the process of selecting something that's ideal for them. And if we expand that out, like if we zoom out a little bit and we expand that concept, there's, think about it this way, right? One of the big things I learned in studying shopper behavior at Amazon is this concept of nested intent, right? I'm not just buying a V-neck cashmere sweater. I want an outfit, right? I might be shopping for a V-neck cashmere sweater, but what is my bigger objective? And especially as we think about social selling and the impact of social media, and how buying online is less an exercise about putting clothes on my body and more about reinforcing my self image, reinforcing my self concept through a shopping environment. One of the impacts that AI can have is the ability to assess and understand what that nested intent actually is, and then curate for me the ideal set of things. So imagine if every shopping experience were sort of like having your own personal shopper and a platform agnostic AI agent that understands everything about you and understands everything that's already in your closet, and can say, hey, do you want to update your look? Do you want to elevate your look? What is the event that you're going to, or the thing that you're going to be doing? And it will curate things for you kind of on the fly. It's like 24/7 Stitch Fix, but it'll be, orders of magnitude more precise and more directly targeted to the shopper. And so this idea of guiding people to the right thing, if we zoom out from that, we'll find that, everything can be hyper personalized. Everything will be hyper curated, and it will be unique to every shopper.
Yeah, I mean, there's data to prove that almost 40% of what the Gen Zs buy, they don't use it right away, or they use it very, very minimally, right? They're not aware um, of what they bought. It just lies in the wardrobe. Either they want to wear it later, or
Mhm. Yeah,
so what I'm trying to get at, and is, have you thought of a complete shift in paradigm where less is more? You know, where like I think one of the conversations I've had, I don't want to guide your thinking,
Mhm.
but the whole concept of usage, how long
Mhm.
can you use it, and the longer you can use it, the more money the manufacturer makes, right? Or something like that. Something, I think we're at a point where we need to think of a business model that not just the consumer to say, you know, you can still look great and you don't need 10 of these outfits to look great.
Yeah, and I think that's going to require a change in how we market, especially when we're talking about Gen Z and Gen Alpha. I've probably seen similar data to what you've seen around garment usage by these generations, that someone will buy a garment, wear it once, then it goes in the closet, and they're already looking for the next thing. And I don't exactly know how we break that trend, because influencer marketing through TikTok and Instagram and other venues puts these generations on a treadmill of constantly trying to update and get the newer next thing. And so brands can get away with delivering to us garments that are not of high quality and don't last, which is unfortunate. So I don't know the answer to how we change that mindset or how we reverse that. I do believe that there is substantial merit in up-leveling the quality of what's being delivered by brands. And I think all of these other technologies that I've mentioned, biofabricated materials, 3D printing, robotics, and AI support, and all these kinds of things will help us get there.
A Margiela jacket, they last forever.
For sure. And it's the difference between thinking of a garment as an heirloom versus a consumable.
Yeah.
There's a very different mindset between the two.
So one thing I notice, Andrew, is innovation within the fashion industry.
Mhm.
So, where do you think innovation works best within an organization?
The innovation that a brand does has to tie into the why of that brand. How does the technology enhance the nature of who they are and the idiosyncratic way they relate to their customers and the method by which they elicit that affinity by shoppers for that brand? Okay. And so we see that younger shoppers do have great concerns for the environment. They want to know that things are being ethically sourced and sustainably sourced, right? They want to understand what the nature of the origin of those articles are. And I think that's really, really important. And so we could think about, all these technologies we talked about: AI, bioengineering, robotics, all of these different technologies, and which ones should they be worrying about? I think they need to be worried about all of them and really be thinking about all of them. But what it comes down to is what is a brand's conviction, right? What do they have strong beliefs around in terms of what they deliver to their shoppers? How do they apply the technology in a way that enhances that why? And so, for example, maybe it's we want to be pioneers in delivering 3D printed athletic shoes, right? That can be, listen, we made them in blue this week. We can make them in red next week and make them in orange the week after that. From a manufacturing perspective, it's trivial because it's all being 3D printed and it's onshore. And so, I can in real time adapt to whatever it is my shoppers want. But in addition to that, and this is the real thing that I would say to the head of any brand out there, which is, what are you intently focused on? And is it narrow enough that it's meaningful? Because if we try and, okay, we want fast fashion and we want to nearshore and we want these things and those things, and we want to be in this market and appeal to that, it's like you spread yourself too thin, it's not going to get there. But what's the one thing that you want to really achieve for your customers? What's the one thing you want to do on behalf of your customers inside your brand, and how focused is that? And what risk are you willing to take to get there? So let me propose an idea here that we can work backwards from. What if a brand said, we want to set a goal that no garment travels more than 1,000 kilometers from where it is manufactured to where it is sold? Now, in today's world, that would seem absurd, right? Nearly impossible. But what if a major brand set that as a goal or an expectation and worked backwards from that and said, okay, how do we get there? Well, okay, by necessity, we need to then produce textiles locally, and we need to be able to, produce and manufacture at high quality and at high standards, but obviously within, a cost envelope and, all of these kinds of things, and work backwards from that. And what does that lead you to? Well, a lot of the technologies we've already discussed. 3D printing, robotics, bioengineering, and a whole bunch of other things that enable that. And so what I want to know is which major brands out there have the courage and the conviction to set a goal like that and make it a reality.
I think at the Exponential Academy, what we refer to that as a purpose, right?
Yeah.
A transformative.
It's your North Star.
A transformative purpose. And I think it's high time that the fashion industry, the leadership, they have a very genuine purpose. Mm-hmm. And this purpose needs to translate into the entire organization.
But you have to be courageous in the face of expediency. You have to be courageous in the face of pragmatism. And I'm curious to see who will be first and put a stake in the ground and say, yeah, we're going to go do this.
I think it's a need of the hour. I think the industry, in addition to technology, they need very courageous leadership. And, mm-hmm. and that's going to change the game in terms of courage, in terms of discipline.
Yeah. Whoever reaches that finish line, I think will have a huge advantage in the marketplace. They will be the ones who will have disrupted the fashion world. And it will be, it'll be, sort of a cataclysmic change for brands who aren't doing that. Because I think, Gen Z, Gen Alpha and beyond, this will be an expectation. Ultimately, the idea that garments came from just up the road as opposed to 12,000 miles away will be table stakes, not something that represents differential value for the shopper. And I'm just dying to see who gets there first.
Lovely. One last question, Andrew, before we wrap this session. I know we might have mentioned it already in the discussion, but if there's one piece of advice for CEOs of potential successful brands in the fashion world, what would it be from you to them?
I would say really make sure that your convictions are real, that they're meaningful and impactful. Make sure that those are reflected in everything you do as a brand, that your values are reflected in everything you do as a brand, because that is how you will create a legitimate, deep, and meaningful connection with your customer. Make absolutely sure that the why of what you do is coming through as loud and clear and obvious as the what of what you do. And, be bold and be willing to take risks as we move forward into a new world. And it's not just AI. I mean, I talk about AI all day, every day. It's not just AI. It's all of the other things it enables. Without AI, it's hard to solve the problems of how do we bioengineer cotton? How do we bioengineer other kinds of materials? Could we bioengineer silk? Could we bioengineer wool? Can we bioengineer leather? All of these things are becoming a reality supported by AI. What about robotics? Supported by AI, right? And so all of these trends are kind of interwoven and we can't really talk about one without the other. So, my advice is embrace technology, but think about the technology holistically and all of the things it can do to make a positive impact. But also make sure, your convictions and the why of what you do and the essence of who you are as a brand really comes through loud and clear. That'd be the advice I'd give those folks.
Ruth, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for sharing those insights.
Thank you, Shami. I'm really grateful to be here.